All right, so let's talk about this idea of a small group restart. Last year I had a small group reset, so this year we're having a small group restart just because it's a different word. But here's a little bit of our current situation as I'm seeing it. I talk to pastors almost every day in different parts of the country. Talked to the small group guy at Seacoast Church down in Charleston today. Talked to some folks out at Menlo Park yesterday. So just, trying to talk to a pastor down in Summerville, South Carolina, which is almost Charleston yesterday. He's doubled in the last 18 months. He's gone from under 100 to almost 200 in 18 months. So it hasn't been a bad year for him. So here's our current situation as I see it from what I'm hearing. And the first thing is, in the last 14 months or so, people have given up on they've given up a lot of things. I'm saying they've given up on it. They've given up a lot of things. And we felt that. And of course, different parts of the country, churches were open to regather at different points. But just a lot of things in general, kids' sports are, went out of people's lives, and music lessons and anything that involved being in a room with other people kind of left in addition to church. But here's the other thing that I'm seeing and hearing, and that is that people are going to be reluctant to fill their lives back up again, because all of a sudden they have a little bit of time and they have a little bit of control of their life. And whereas before they may have launched into 14 different activities, they may not want to go back to that just yet. This year has kind of conditioned us. Now, some of it is a matter of they were too busy before and they needed to give themselves a break. The other is a little bit of the phenomena of, if you've ever been a member at a health club and you stopped going for a while, then you think you should go back, and then you feel bad about because you're paying every month and you still don't go back. I think we're getting a little bit of that, of people getting back into their routines once again. So what does that mean for us? Well, I was talking to one pastor that pre-COVID, they had 3 services on Sunday morning. Right now, they only have 1. And it's not because of a lack of potential attendance. It's because they have a lack of people willing to serve in their children's area. So people are reluctant to fill their lives back up again. People have been separated for a long time. And again, different parts of North America, different parts of the world, that has been either because of restrictions or because of people's personal choices. And so they are ready to regather in some form or fashion. However, not everyone is ready to regather in person. Some people are just like chomping at the bit. I know of one church, pastor friend of mine down in Georgia. Now, don't tell on them. They never actually closed their services. They never actually stopped meeting in person. Now, a year ago, they had 4 or 5 people meeting in person. But the pastor told me, he said, this is Georgia. You can't tell people they can't go to church. But some people are not ready to meet in person. Some people are chomping at the bit to meet in person. But others are going to meet online. And the other thing is that, online groups are not the same as in-person groups, but not everyone's ready to meet in person. And some online groups can't meet offline. I was talking to a small group leader the other day who people in their group, while they were meeting online, they started out, they were all in the same town. And then over the year, as they were meeting online, people moved to other towns. So now they can't go offline because they're not located next to each other. So we will remain hybrid. Life will remain hybrid for a while. But that's not all bad. I mean, the truth is, you go to like Chick-fil-A, the drive-through is daunting. You can't go inside, but the drive-through is daunting. So I order everything on the app ahead of time, and then we find our spot and put the number of what spot we're in the parking lot, and they bring it to my car, and I don't have to deal with the drive-through line, and I get to see more of the menu on their app. So I'm not unhappy about that. Or the Walgreens app, and this is not sponsored by Chick-fil-A or Walgreens, but I can order whatever I want from Walgreens, put it in the app. They will put it in a bag, bring it to my car, and I don't have to stand in line when they're trying to find the cashier. Not so bad. Hybrid is not so bad. Okay, if we haven't met, most of you I know. Some of you I know really well. I'm surprised you're on here. I'm happy you're on here. But my wife and I have been married 21 years this year. 4 children. The youngest is 7. The oldest is 19. I've been a pastor for over 30 years now, and I've written 4 books, 2 with Hendrickson Publishers, 2 self-published, and I've coached over 1,500 churches in the last 17 years in various forms and fashions. Definitely beyond webinars. But anyway, that's me. So a little bit of a history lesson. I was actually listening to an interview with a historian the other day, and he said this, that after the Spanish influenza, which was 1918 to 1919, came the Roaring Twenties. And then, of course, the host of the news program said, and after the Roaring Twenties came the Great Depression. We're not going to go there, and hopefully we'll do whatever we can to avoid it. But the Roaring Twenties, people traveled extensively. And what's interesting is, in the last few weeks, I've been reading articles about how American Airlines has added 150 new routes to their travel schedule, and United and others have followed suit. Cruises are gearing up. Resorts are gearing up, because once the pandemic is hopefully behind us, then people are ready to go. And so in the Roaring Twenties, they traveled extensively throughout the United States as well as throughout the world. The people put the Spanish influenza behind them. That once the 20s started, this historian said, people did not even mention the Spanish influenza. Now, they would talk about World War I, because that was a significant event, as horrible as it was. They would talk about World War I. They would not talk about the Spanish influenza. They just wiped it from their memory, which I think we're going to see a little bit of that too. So the big question for us here is, what does this mean for groups? What does it mean for groups? Well, I think that people will be pickier about their commitments. People will be pickier about their commitments, because now that they've taken a year off, more or less, depending on where you live, they have a little more control over what they're going to let back in and when they're going to let it back in. People are more likely to gather a group of friends than hang out with strangers. So again, they're going to be pickier. So if you were being picky about how you were spending your time and who you were spending your time with, wouldn't you rather spend your time with people that you already know and love, instead of spending time being thrown into a group with a bunch of people you've never met before, and maybe becoming friends, maybe not. People are looking for more flexibility in what they do. Again, this is a year that has trained us to be flexible, and I don't know how your year has been. I've been working at home, but I always work at home, but I haven't been traveling at all, which is kind of nice too. But then also I've had 3 kids that have been home in online school. I had a son that graduated from high school last year. What a bummer of a year to graduate. But we've all been home all the time, which is kind of nice, because I get to see all my kids more than I have, normally. Now, sometimes we're all locked in our own rooms doing our own thing. We don't see each other that much, which is kind of sad since we live in the same house. But people are going to be pickier about their commitments. They're going to want more flexibility, and they're more likely to gather with people that they know, unless they're new to the area and they don't know anybody. Then they want to make friends at your church. Let's talk about small groups in 2021. And I take this from a little bit of my thinking from last year, and that is this, that the why and the who are the same. So why we do what we do, who we have, that's the same. Our mission is the same. Jesus said, therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. That mission is the same. Your staff does not need to go on a 3-day retreat up in the mountains or out by the ocean to figure out your church's mission. That's your mission right there. But if you want to go away for 3 days to the mountain or the ocean, feel free. But this was already decided. So what we're doing is the same, to go and make disciples. That's our mission, of all nations, of all people groups, all ethnic groups. The mission is the same. The how and the what have changed. And this is the thing that we need to be cautious of, because things are not automatically going to go back to the way they were in 2019, just because the pandemic hopefully is coming to an end. I know I'm working with the church in Michigan and their cases are up, and I don't want to get into the whole COVID report and all of that, but things are not quite back to 100% of the way they were. And so the fact that schools, even though Topeka, maybe Lawrence, Elizabeth, you guys got a little bit of snow this week, right? Did your kids have a snow day? Because my kids don't have snow days. They just go online. Of course, my kids are already at home, but even the kids that are meeting on campus, instead of saying, oh, you get the day off because of weather, because of whatever, which I'm in South Carolina. When they get a snow day here, they lose their minds. I tell them, back home, we call this spring, but they don't appreciate that. But anyway, kids that are meeting in person, they just say, oh, well, our campus is closed today. Everybody's going to go online. So a lot of things have changed, a lot of reluctance to things. I noticed going through the Walmart marketplace the other day that all the customers have become Walmart employees, and we all have to ring up our own groceries. And so that definitely has changed. And some of the methods, some of the things that we do have changed. This isn't the first time. This isn't the first time for the church by far. Jesus' last words to his disciples, he said to them, it's not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority, but you will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you. And you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. Now, notice specifically the places that Jesus said that they would be his witnesses. In Jerusalem, they were in Jerusalem, Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. I know we're familiar with this passage. But what I want you to see is the fulfillment of Acts 1:8 is found in Acts 8:1. And Saul approved of their killing Stephen. And that day a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem. And all except the apostles were scattered throughout, where? Judea and Samaria. Jesus said, you'll be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. So the fulfillment of Acts 1:8 is found in Acts 8:1. And what catalyzed the expansion of the church, what catalyzed that missionary effort, was not a voluntary circumstance. It was persecution in Jerusalem that caused the church to move. What I'm trying to say is this: God has often used adverse circumstances to cause his church to move, to cause his church to rethink things. And you can think about that even in your own life. Has God ever forcibly moved you for his purposes? And sometimes we think, well, I was forcibly moved because of the way they treated me or the circumstance, or I lost the job, or I had to move for whatever reason. And yet the Bible tells us that God's plan for our locations and when and where we're going to live and how and all of that. So here's the question that I've begun to embrace this last year, because as things begin to feel more normal and yet remain abnormal, or the new normal, which I'm trying to avoid the cliches, but some of them you just can't. But as people start coming back, as things begin to feel more normal, it's not going to be business as usual. And I hope you're not expecting that. And some of it's going to be frustrating. I have in my coaching group this year, a church, a nationally known pastor, I won't mention them. And according to the restrictions, they can only have a portion of their auditorium open for a portion of the seating open for worship on Sunday. And so they were waiting for, okay, people are going to make reservations. We're going to fill this right up. People will be so glad to be back. And the pastor will be so thrilled to have people back at church, right? And what they discovered was they had less than 20% of their restricted capacity was actually filled. So if they could have 500 seats open, only 100 people showed up. And the pastor was very disappointed, which we all would be, because you think people would be anxious to be back. We're certainly anxious to see them, right? But sometimes we get our metrics, we talk about, the joke is that our metrics are nickels and noses, right? They're certainly not 1 second streams, but we have our nickels and noses, and we feel good when we have a large number of nickels and a large number of noses, right? But maybe we need to figure out other ways to feel good about things. And when we face things that we feel are disappointing, when we face things that we feel are difficult, when circumstances are not exactly lining up the way we want them to, the question that I've started asking myself this year is this: what does this make possible? What does this make possible? And so just a small, for instance, I was doing an online leader training with Josh's church in Topeka. And I did my presentation. At the end, we opened it up for questions from one of the leaders. And one of his leaders asked me, she said, I've got a dilemma because part of my group is sick of meeting online. They're ready to meet in person. And the other part of the group is not ready to meet in person, and they want to continue to meet online. What should I do? And of course, me being me, said to her, well, which ones do you like the best? And they all kind of laughed a little bit. But the truth is that, if you have a group that wants to be in person and a group that wants to be online, you have potential in that for the people that want to meet in person to invite a few more people that want to meet in person, the people that only want to meet online to invite a few more online. So what does this make possible? It makes possible that every group could become 2 groups, right? So we need to begin to think about that, and people don't want to meet in person. Everything is decentralized. They would rather meet by Zoom because we've been conditioned to that. Some of us are sick of Zoom. I don't even use my microphone. That's why I didn't have my earphones in, because I just put the computer on, and I don't like looking at myself all day. So sometimes I just take my video off, but I'm doing this for you. Aren't you glad? But anyway, what does all of this make possible? Well, people are used to meeting by Zoom. And so at their convenience, we can meet. If we need to meet a half an hour with our coaches or a half an hour with our leaders, we can do that at 8:30 at night when hopefully their kids are in bed, and meet for 30 minutes and then be done. They didn't have to drive to the church. We didn't have to turn the lights on, unlock the doors, turn the lights off, unlock the doors, then go home. We could just do it like this. And people have become very used to that. So there's a convenience in all of this, even though it lacks, some of the personal nature. Sometimes the most effective motivation for change is not having another choice. And that would be especially for those of us that may be particularly stubborn. I'm one of those. But anyway, sometimes the most effective motivation for change is not having another choice. For years and years and years, I could not get my act together on coaching. And then the day that we doubled our groups in a day, I got my act together on coaching, because I could adequately dabble in coaching with the leaders that I had. But when we had twice as many, I had twice the problem. And so the short on that is I matched them all up, an experienced leader with a new leader, created the buddy system. But sometimes the most effective motivation for change is not having another choice. All right. So the how and the what have changed. We have in person, we have online, we have hybrid. Some people have called hybrid phygital. I don't like that. It sounds like somebody who can't sit still. But anyway, and these things are going to stay with us. People have discovered online that, people that are far from them and far from God, that they can meet on a platform that they're familiar with, and they can do a group. And that's created some really, really good things. Changing the group size. Groups are trending smaller. I tell people with online groups, anything bigger than the Brady Bunch is too big. So you have 9 people on the screen. That's a good size. That's why we're all not all on the screen right now, because it would be too many of us. If we all had our mics on, it would be mass confusion. So smaller is better. In-person groups, again, 6 to 8 people is what looks like the norm. I wouldn't limit them if they could have more than that. But if they're more than 8 people, then I would certainly encourage the group to subgroup, so that everybody can get their word in. But groups are trending smaller online and in person. What else? how valuable are groups in 2021? If you had a culture of groups pre-COVID, then groups have been very valuable. This interview I mentioned on my podcast that came out yesterday with Elliot Diaz from Manna Church, they had 70% of their people in groups pre-COVID. And then during COVID, they had 90% of their people in groups because they could meet in person, but they couldn't gather for worship. But they could meet online for worship, in person or online for groups. I had a church in San Diego that last year, their groups increased by 211% over what they did in 2019. And a lot of it was, this was a large church that had a lot of offerings. COVID cleared the deck. They did online worship, they did outreach to the community, and they did small groups. And for those of us whose hearts beat for small groups, could you imagine if everything else had to go away and all people could do was outreach in small groups? That's what he thought. 80% of their staff are leading groups right now, which is amazing. If you don't have groups, then groups might not be very high on your people's priority list unless they can do the group with the people who are important to them, with their friends. So again, people maybe don't want to just sign up to be placed in any random group, which if you're doing that, you need to get out of that business because you're just working too hard for very little result. But give people permission and opportunity to gather a group. They will take you up on that. Another thing we need to think about is your church is decentralized. And for small group people, we have kind of begged and prayed and pleaded that our ministry would be more decentralized. Right now, your church is decentralized. Don't re-centralize it, right? It's decentralized. Leave it out there. Ministry is now 168 hours per week. And if you're doing the math, that's all of the hours in a week. Ministry is 168 hours. Ministry is no longer come to the class at 3 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. Put that class online and people can choose any hour among 168 hours per week. Put everything online. Habits have changed, and it's easier to access something online, even though it's not as personable. It's easier to get there. It's easier to do it. And people have become accustomed to doing this now. So offer in-person things with groups, but the things that you could put online, put your training online, and you could do it live. You could do it on demand. Put your growth track online, your membership class, your next steps online. And people can access as they can become a member of your church at 2 a.m. if they wanted to, because maybe they had time. But if we only offer certain dates and times, then we're really narrowing down who can be involved. So we have a whole world that's open to us, people doing school, people getting college degrees, people working online. This was kind of a novelty a year ago. And then it became a necessity. But now we need to see this as an opportunity. So people are used to online, maybe reluctant to regather. Some people are chomping at the bit to regather. And so again, we go back to our question, what does this make possible? And I'm seeing a lot of people that once churches were regathering for worship, there were a lot of people who started attending online first, and then they showed up at the church. In fact, some of the churches I've worked with this last year saw when they began to regather for worship, they saw more people that they didn't know than people that they did know, because people who had started attending online showed up in person because they were looking for next steps. So online worship is the new front door to your church. And we need to treat it as the new front door, not the camera that's just mounted with a stationary shot streaming the service. We need to put some effort into that and make it a good experience. The worship mix is different in an online service than in an in-person service. In an in-person service, the room is a little forgiving if the singer's a little bit flat. Online service, guilty as charged. It needs a different mix. All right, we're not talking about worship services. Recruit more leaders. We need more leaders because people are ready to get together. And in order for them to get together, we've got to have more leaders. And Here's my advice. I stopped personally recruiting leaders in 2004. So 17 years ago, I served that church for 3 more years. I served a whole other church of 6,500 for 4 years, but I stopped personally recruiting leaders in 2004. Your senior pastor must be the small group champion. And if you guys have been on a podcast before, you've heard me say this. Other than Jesus, the reason people attend your church is because of your senior pastor if they're not connected to each other. They laugh at your pastor's jokes. They like your pastor's style. They enjoy your pastor's teaching. So other than Jesus, the reason they attend your church is because of your senior pastor. But don't mention this to your worship pastor. It'll break his heart. But your senior pastor has to be the small group champion. I am working right now as the outsourced life group director for a church in Lansing, Michigan. And I have not been to Lansing, Michigan for 18 months. And this relationship just started in the last couple of months. And right now we are recruiting people to start groups. And the pastor is standing up on Sunday morning because they don't know me from Adam. Pastor standing up on Sunday morning, making the invitation. They're texting host to the church's number on their phone. And then they come into a briefing in person and online, led by yours truly from 747 miles away in South Carolina. And it's working because even if I was on staff at that church and picked up and moved to Michigan, they still wouldn't know me from Adam. And it's the senior pastor's influence. It's the senior pastor's credibility. Why? Because your senior pastor will get 3 times the result that you will. How do I know that? Because I handpicked leaders and built groups for 7 years and got 30% of our adults into groups. And the first time my senior pastor stood up on a Sunday morning, we had prepared a curriculum with his teaching on the video. And he said, if you would be interested in starting one of these groups, we'll help you get started. We doubled our groups in 1 day. It had taken 7 years to get to 30%. We doubled our groups in 1 day. 6 months later, we doubled our groups again and had 125% of our average worship attendance connected into groups. So get your senior pastor involved. Get involved in what your senior pastor is interested in. And whatever your senior pastor is interested in, there is a small group reason to be a part of that. All right, the small group boom is coming. That's what I'm calling this fall. People are ready to get together in person or online. And how do we get them together? Because they're going to be a little picky about who they get together with. Give them permission and opportunity. Give them permission and opportunity. Get together with your friends and do a study. Invite your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers. Do a group wherever you feel comfortable, in your home, online, in your workplace, in a Facebook group, wherever people are finding community. So if they're gamers, online gamers, they're finding community on Twitch. And you can't do a small group on Twitch, but in that place where they're finding community, they can invite people into a small group. So who do they want to hang out with? Who do they know? What platform do they know? And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Don't go become an expert on Twitch. I only know because I have a 15-year-old. Otherwise, I would have no idea about Twitch, or I would have no idea what in the world WandaVision was all about. But I have a 15-year-old. He explained it all. So that's handy. Create a felt need study for the fall. Something that, something about relationships, about marriage, about family, about how to deal with stress. You could call something the new normal, but if people don't roll their eyes, that'd be great. Something that's going to appeal to people. This is not the time to talk about, giving and fasting and evangelism. And those are important topics for down the road, but you want something that is going to be felt needs that people can invite their friends to. That series we're doing in Michigan right now is called Together. And why is it called Together? Because we've spent a year apart and now we want to be together. Get the senior pastor to take the lead. So where's your senior pastor headed in the fall? A few of you are senior pastors. Where are you headed in the fall? And then how can you attach small groups to that? How can you make something to go along with that? Whether you purchase a curriculum that follows your theme, whether you create your own curriculum, whether you use your iPhone and make a video and put it up on YouTube, and then have a few questions for people to download. And well, you say, I don't have an iPhone. Well, put it into your budget. There's a new phone for you. You got something out of this webinar today. Give everyone a promotion, because what I'm describing to you is going to be a bit of chaos. We wanted to make it organized chaos and provide the minimal amount of structure that we need in order to support this. So every leader, every current leader becomes somebody's coach. That's what I'm doing with this church in Michigan. Every life group leader that they have is taking on 2 new hosts that they're going to walk alongside from when the person says yes through the end of the series. And then if you currently have coaches, then they become your small group team. So your team is going to manage your coaches. Your coaches are going to take care of your leaders. And once you do the hard work of building that structure, your life just got a whole lot easier. The pastor is recruiting the group leaders. Just take a nice sigh of relief. The group leaders are recruiting the members. The current group leaders are taking care of the new ones. And your current coaches are part of your team. I led groups, 400 groups, plus a bunch of other classes and things in a church of 6,500 total, 5,000 adults, with an entirely volunteer team. Small group team, volunteers, coaches, volunteers. My only employee was my assistant, and it worked. Now, if you have a bunch of money, you want to hire people, go for it. But just because you pay them doesn't mean they're going to do more work. Now, some people say, now we've heard of these church-wide campaigns and group in the box and, all of these sorts of things. And we just throw all this stuff out there. We have a lot of excitement for 6 weeks and the whole thing goes over the cliff. Well, that's not the right way to do it. You need to think of this as a continuum of disciple making, or a continuum of a leadership development process. So you ask somebody to gather their friends, and it's not going to be a straight line. Sometimes it kind of looks like this, but you ask them to gather their friends. And so there's a connection. You get people connected. You get people who are already connected. They're already friends, neighbors, coworkers. They know each other. You give them something intentional to do about their spiritual growth. So then from connection, we go into discipleship. Discipleship requires relationship because it requires accountability. And if you don't have a relationship with someone, you can't hold them accountable. If you do, then you go into another thing that's called legalism, and I don't want to go there. So from connection to discipleship to leadership. And so you take people that they know, you grow up that group, you offer them a sequence of curriculum. Then in the group, you grow up people to lead, and you form new groups. I called one lady, it's a current life group leader at this church in Michigan. I said, are you going to do this Together series with everybody? She says, no, I'm not. And I said, okay, that's fine. You don't have to. She said, well, the reason I'm not is that I have 3 ladies in my group who are all going to host a new group for the Together series, but we're still going to meet together. But we're going to do something else because they're already doing the study in their new groups that they're doing. And of course, this leader then became their coach because they already have a relationship. All right. So that is kind of the end of what I have to say. We'll take questions in a minute, but first you have to listen to my sales pitch. How about that? So here's my offer. I'm doing something I normally don't do this time of year. I'm starting a 12-month coaching group. And the nature of the group is that it meets for 6 months as a group. And that's where we talk about best practices, all these things that I've learned from working with 1,500 churches over the last 17 years. Then we meet one-on-one every month. And this is because every church is unique. So my current coaching group, I've got 8 different churches, different parts of the country, different denominations, different sizes. And so we're going to essentially do 8 different versions of the same thing, because we customize it for each church. You would receive 5 of my books, as well as 3 of my online courses. We do kind of a lecture lab model where you would read a chapter or watch a video outside of the group meeting, and then we get together as a group. I don't lecture them like I'm doing you. We spend our time discussing. The group's going to start in July and go through June of next year. I usually only start these groups in January, but because of the nature of this year, because of what I'm predicting is the coming small group boom, I feel like we need to do another one mid-year. If you sign up now, I will give you a monthly coaching call for April, May, and June at no extra charge. You get 15 months for the price of 12. And so registration closes when 8 churches have signed up, or July 1st, whichever comes first. Usually it's the group fills up before we get to the deadline. Currently, there are 2 churches rather, that are enrolled in the group, and I've got 4 others that are considering. So if this is something you might be interested in, you can reach out to me at too far. Alan White at alanwhite.org, or call me. My cell phone number is there. Okay, so I went through a bunch of stuff, and hopefully I hit most of your questions. I kind of went through and looked at your surveys to see what you were asking. But thoughts, questions, complaints, what would you like to discuss? We'll take a few minutes here before we have to go. You can either turn your mic on and ask me, or you can type in the chat and ask the question, and I'd be more than happy to answer it. I have to say I'm having fun being the outsourced life group pastor for this church in Michigan. I've been on staff at a church for 10 years. And so I try to talk to pastors every day, so I get a sense of, what's going on, because I don't want to, be pontificating irrelevant things from my ivory tower, But it's fun to kind of be back in it, roll up my sleeves, and doing the host briefing and talking today about the connection event we're going to do in a couple of weeks for the people who don't get invited to groups, and having a good time. But I haven't had to get on a plane yet, so it's interesting. All right, questions, thoughts, complaints? Maybe you're all muted. I don't know. Let me see what I can do to remedy that. Yes.
Something quick.
Go ahead. Oh, did I mute you again? Sorry, let's try this again.
Okay, I think I'm muted. Okay.
I'm not going to touch anything else. Go ahead. Oh, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey.
One of the things that I've kind of lost control of in loosening up everything was training for the leaders, especially that in-person training where you have everyone's attention and the lead pastor is there. And so, because we have increased the number of our groups to some degree, because people are doing it with their families or as couples or with extended family, neighbors. So that's been really cool, but there's very little accountability, and there's not that central message of this is how you should be, communicating. And so I think that doing a hybrid training of some type where they can watch it online that's pre-recorded or something, that would solve that. But that was a concern that our lead pastor and I had, was that we'd loosened up things so much during COVID. And if we aren't going to be able to get back in person 100%, what are we going to do? So,
yeah. And I would say, you may not want to do that right away, because in most places groups are kind of winding down, and by Memorial Day, groups aren't going to, be meeting as consistently, maybe do more social things during the summer. But when you're gearing up for your fall series, then I would definitely, pull out the stops. If you have a senior pastor and maybe even have some food, that's always very popular. But then for the folks that aren't ready to gather in person, you could stream that. I kind of like the way I'm doing these briefings, because I'm sitting here at my desk in South Carolina. And so this may sound goofy if you're in town, but my video is up on a big screen in their chapel where people are gathering in person. And then the people that are joining from the online service are joining the Zoom meeting just like you are. So I'm doing physical and online at the same time. Now, if you're there in the building, we have to do it differently and have a camera set up and stream it, or record it and then share it with people later, or do a unique version where you're direct to camera or what have you. But I don't think it's cost you anything right now, because there's not an expectation that people are going to do a lot of gathering in person. But I think as hopefully summer, comes and, we have a little more confidence in getting out, then definitely it's almost like, we've saved all this up for a year. So now when we get ready to launch something, then, it'll be kind of more popular than ever to gather again.
Yeah, and I love the idea of all of the current leaders coaching 2 new leaders. That's a great idea.
Yeah, and 2 is reasonable. It's not, an outrageous number. So for those of you who don't know Elizabeth, she is from my home, not my, Josh and Warren are from my hometown of Topeka. Elizabeth is from the place of my birth, Lawrence, Kansas. So rock, chalk, Jayhawk, which I don't say to the people in Lansing, Michigan, because that's Michigan State country. All right, I have a couple of questions that came up here on the chat. Speaking of Topeka, Warren asks, you mentioned promoting all the leaders to coaches. What type of vetting process do you have for coaches? So here's my vetting, Warren. I used to recruit them with a job description once I thought that, they were producing the things I wanted. As far as leaders, you look at your leaders, the ones that you'd say, wow, I want 10 more groups just like that. Then I would, invite them to more. And then the ones that I looked at, I said, I don't want 10 more like that. I don't even want that one. Then I wouldn't invite them. I take them out to lunch. I'd present the job description. I'd pick up the check so they would feel obligated. And some of them did fine. Some of them didn't, struggled, and some of them didn't do anything. And so what I started doing was giving them a trial run. So just like what I described, if you have a 6-week series where you're inviting people to gather their friends into a group, I would invite experienced leaders for that 6 weeks to walk alongside the new leaders. And then if they enjoyed it and if they were effective, I would invite them to more. If they weren't effective or if they didn't do it, at the end of the 6 weeks, I just thanked them for fulfilling their commitment. And then that was the end of it. Because before, when I recruited them with the job description and said, you are now a coach, and they didn't do it, then I had to fire them and they were a volunteer, and that was very awkward. So I like the idea of doing some kind of a trial run, seeing if they would help you temporarily. And if it works out, invite them to more. If it doesn't work out, then you just say, oh, well. All right. Antioch says, hi, Alan. We're committed to Rooted as a way to create leaders and groups. Wondering if the coaching would allow for that. I love Rooted. And in fact, I worked for about 18 months with Mariners Church to help them with their pastor gatherings for Rooted. If you've been to one of those, my head was in that about 4 or 5 years ago. I think that, Rooted, you definitely need coaching because of the stuff that comes up. Leaders need a place to, or facilitators need a place to process what's going on in their Rooted groups. I think the most challenging thing I found with Rooted had to do with the ongoing groups, because you either have to raise up a leader to lead the ongoing Rooted group during Rooted, or if the facilitator became the leader of the ongoing group, then you lost facilitators and you would have to start back up again. But I think the coaching is good all the way around. I think anytime that you can match experienced leaders up with new leaders and they have conversations and only like the tough questions bubble up to you, I think you're better off. And I think you accomplish far more through coaches than you ever would pulling people together for meetings. And I got to the point where, because my coaches were interacting with all my leaders, I got to the point where I only ever did 2 meetings a year. I did a big kind of rally for the fall with the senior pastor, kind of what Elizabeth was describing. And then at the beginning of the year, I did a retreat, an offsite retreat where I bring in a speaker, and the leaders actually paid for their way and everything. I budgeted for the speaker. But those were the only couple of things I asked them to do. Now I would send out, back in the day, blog posts. Nowadays, do a short video and send it out to the leaders with a 2-minute training tip or something on it. But coaching helps you customize, the training to the leaders' questions. And so that's why I'm a big, big fan of coaching. All right. I know several people have had to go. If you have to go, I understand. If you have a question, I'll stick around for a minute and answer a question if you got a quick one here. All right, folks, I'm not seeing anything else. So thank you for joining me today. If you think of a question after we hang up, email me, alan@alanwhite.org, and I'll be more than happy to connect with you. Thank you for your time. I hope this was beneficial to you. I hope this confirms some things you were feeling. And if things aren't quite back to normal when we expect it to be, it's okay. So we have to ask ourselves, what does this make possible, right? All right. God bless. Have a great rest of the day, and hope to see you